"I didn't invite you, Rosemary," Olivia said, her voice as cold and clinical as a surgical blade, while she sat at the very mahogany table I polished with my own hands. She looked me dead in the eye, dismissing my presence in the house I built and paid for. "Imagine being a stranger in your own legacy. Well, welcome to my life. I am Rosemary Collins. At 65, I've spent more than 3 decades looking into the mouths of the residents of this town as a dental surgeon. You don't get through 35 years of dentistry without developing a steady hand, a sharp eye for detail, and a thick skin. I've always been a woman of precision and hard work. My late husband, David, and I didn't just stumble into success, we earned it. We built this Victorian-style estate brick by brick, intended it to be our family sanctuary, a place where the Collins name meant something. When David passed away 5 years ago, my world narrowed down to this house and my only son, Ethan. Ethan was always my pride. I worked those long shifts at the clinic to ensure he had the best education, the best opportunities, and eventually, the best start in life. When he married Olivia Parker, I wanted to be the supportive mother-in-law everyone dreams of. I stepped back, moved into the guest cottage on the property to give them space, and even handed them the keys to the main house. I thought I was passing the torch, ensuring the legacy continued. I saw myself as the matriarch, the wise elder who provided the foundation for their new life. I believed that by giving them the house I built and the furniture I hand-selected, I was buying us a lifetime of closeness. I didn't realize I was actually handing over the ammunition they would eventually use to shut me out of my own home. Deep beneath the white coat and the professional stoicism of a retired dentist lies a hollow space that I've tried to fill with family duty. My greatest fear has always been irrelevance. When you spend your life being the person everyone relies on, the one who fixes the pain, the one who signs the checks, the one who maintains the structure, the thought of being extra is terrifying. Since David passed, that fear has manifested as a physical ache in my chest. Sometimes, I find myself standing in the middle of a room, my fingers tracing the edge of a door frame or the fabric of a curtain, just to remind myself that I still belong here. My hands, once so firm and steady during complex root canals, now have a slight, treacherous tremor when I feel overlooked. I try to hide it by gripping my silver locket or smoothing out my skirt, but the anxiety is there, buzzing under my skin. I know I can be sensitive. I know that I tend to overanalyze a tone of voice or a lingering silence. It's because my identity is so inextricably tied to being the provider. When Olivia looks at me with that blank, polite indifference, it feels like she's erasing my history. My eyes, which used to scan x-rays for the tiniest fractures, now scan her face for any sign of warmth, but all I find is a wall. I often misinterpret her need for space as a rejection of my very existence. I see a dish left in the sink not as a simple oversight, but as a lack of respect for the home I sacrificed my youth to maintain. This sensitivity stems from a deep-seated vulnerability. I am terrified that I am no longer needed. My face, marked by the fine lines of 65 years of smiles and stresses, often tightens into a mask of sternness when I'm actually feeling deeply hurt. I find myself holding my breath in their presence, my shoulders hunched, waiting for the metaphorical blow. My body language is defensive because I feel like an intruder in a space where my soul is rooted. Every time they change a light fixture or move a piece of furniture David and I chose together, it feels like they are sanding down the edges of my life until there's nothing left for me to hold on to. I want to be the heart of this family, but I fear I've become nothing more than a ghost haunting the hallways of my own success, flickering in and out of their lives while they wait for my light to finally go out. Before the walls started closing in, there was a season where I truly believed we could make this work. Life in the Collins estate had a rhythmic, almost poetic flow. Every Sunday morning, I would walk from my cottage to the main house, the dew still clinging to the grass, carrying a basket of fresh pastries or organic berries I'd picked up from the local market. Olivia would meet me in the kitchen, her hair tied back in a messy bun, and for a while, she seemed genuinely happy to see me. We would brew a pot of Earl Grey, the expensive loose-leaf kind I've always preferred, and sit at the breakfast nook, discussing the garden or the latest town news. I felt a sense of profound peace, watching her and Ethan navigate their new marriage within the walls I had raised. Those early months were filled with a gentle, shared laughter. I remember helping Olivia pick out the silk drapes for the sunroom. We spent hours looking at swatches, our heads bent together, debating the merits of cream versus eggshell. I was joyful, almost giddy, to have a daughter figure in the house. I would share my secret recipes, showing her exactly how David liked his pot roast seasoned, and she would listen with what I thought was genuine interest. There was a lightness in the air, a sense of joy and shared harmony that made me feel like my retirement was going to be a golden era of family bonding. I took pride in being the silent benefactor, I would quietly call the landscapers to ensure the hydrangeas were blooming perfectly, or I'd drop off a bottle of vintage wine for their date nights. Ethan would give me a quick squeeze of the shoulder and tell me how lucky they were to have me so close. Olivia would smile, a soft, appreciative curve of the lips that reached her eyes. We were building something beautiful, or so I thought. We moved through the house like a well-rehearsed dance troupe, mindful of each other's rhythms. I made sure never to overstay my welcome, and they made sure to always keep a place set for me. It was a time of soft lighting and easy conversations, a period where the friction of our different personalities was smoothed over by a shared desire for a happy home. I felt useful, respected, and most importantly, loved. I didn't see the shadows stretching behind the smiles, nor did I realize that the boundaries I thought were flexible were actually being reinforced into steel bars. The shift didn't happen with a bang, but with a series of cold, calculated whispers. It began when I noticed the invitations, or rather, the lack of them. I was in my cottage, just a few hundred yards from the main house, when I saw several unfamiliar cars pulling into the driveway. My heart did a nervous little flutter. It was a Saturday evening, the kind of night David and I used to host grand dinners for the local medical board. I assumed Ethan or Olivia had simply forgotten to mention a small gathering. I waited, my eyes fixed on the glowing windows of my own dining room, expecting a text or a quick call saying, "Mom, come over for a glass of wine." It never came. Feeling a mix of confusion and a rising tide of anxiety, I decided to walk over. I told myself I was just dropping off the mail that had been delivered to my cottage by mistake. As I approached the back deck, the sound of laughter and clinking silverware drifted through the air, sounds that belonged to my history, now happening without me. I stepped through the French doors, and the room went dead silent. There were 8 people seated at my mahogany table, enjoying a lavish spread of catering. Olivia was at the head of the table, my seat looking radiant in a silk dress I'd never seen. "Rosemary?" she asked, her voice flat. She didn't stand up. She didn't smile. She just sat there, her fingers curled around the stem of a crystal wine glass David bought me for our silver anniversary. I saw the lights. I stammered, my hands beginning to tremble. I instinctively tucked them into the pockets of my cardigan, trying to maintain some shred of dignity. "I thought I'd bring over the mail and see if you needed anything." "We don't," Olivia replied. She didn't look at Ethan, who was staring intently at his plate. His face flushed a deep, shamed crimson. "And Rosemary? I didn't invite you. This is a private dinner for our friends." The words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving it tight and frozen. My eyes darted to the guest strangers who were now looking at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance, as if I were a senile relative who had wandered out of her room. I felt small, discarded, and utterly humiliated. I looked at the table I had spent decades polishing, where I had celebrated every one of Ethan's birthdays. Now, I was being told I didn't belong at it. My gaze moved to Ethan, pleading for him to say something, to bridge this sudden, terrifying gap, but he wouldn't look up. He just sat there, his shoulders hunched, a coward in the face of his wife's coldness. The betrayal stung worse than Olivia's words. I felt a surge of heat in my chest, a mix of rage and profound sorrow. My jaw tightened, a habit from my years in the clinic when a procedure got difficult. I felt the muscles in my neck cord with tension. "This is my home, Olivia," I whispered, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "It was your home, Rosemary," she corrected me, her eyes as hard as flint. "You gave it to us, remember? And right now, you're trespassing on a private event." She turned back to her guest and made a joke about unexpected interruptions, and the table erupted into forced laughter. I stood there for a second longer, my body feeling heavy and useless, before I turned and walked back into the dark. I realized then that I wasn't a matriarch anymore. I was just a tenant they were waiting to evict. The night of the dinner party left me in a state of shock, but the true turning point, the moment the floor beneath me finally gave way, happened 3 days later. I had spent those days in a fog of hurt, waiting for Ethan to walk across the lawn and apologize. I expected him to say Olivia was just stressed, that it was all a misunderstanding. But instead of an apology, I found a locksmith's van parked in the circular driveway. I walked over, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My breath was shallow, and I felt a cold sweat breaking out across my brow. As I reached the front porch, I saw the locksmith removing the heavy brass deadbolt, the one David had installed himself for our protection. Olivia was standing there with a clipboard, looking like she was conducting a business transaction rather than altering the sanctity of our family home. "Olivia, what is going on?" I asked, my voice trembling. I reached out to touch the doorframe, my fingers shaking so much I had to grip the wood to steady myself. She didn't even turn her head to look at me initially. She just tapped her pen against the clipboard. "We're updating the security, Rosemary. It's for the best. We need to feel like this is our space, not a public library where people can just wander in and out." "Wander in? I built this house," I cried out. The pain in my chest was so sharp I thought I might be having a heart attack. My eyes blurred with hot, angry tears, but I refused to let them fall. I stood as tall as my 65-year-old frame would allow, my jaw set in that rigid line that once commanded respect in my dental practice. Then came the moment that shattered everything. Olivia turned to face me, her expression shifting from cold indifference to a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. She leaned in close, her eyes narrowing until they were like two dark slits. "Let's be clear, Rosemary," she hissed, her voice low so the locksmith wouldn't hear. "You are a relic. You're a ghost of a life that ended when David died. You think these walls belong to you because you paid for them? No. They belong to me because I control the person who lives inside them. Ethan does exactly what I say, and I say, you're no longer welcome in the main house. From now on, you stay in your cottage. If I see you on this porch again without a written invitation, I'll have you cited for harassment." I felt the blood rush to my head, a roaring sound filling my ears. My hands balled into fists at my sides, the skin stretched tight over my knuckles. It wasn't just anger. It was a profound realization of my own naivety. I looked at her face, the smug curve of her lips, the way she adjusted her expensive watch, and I saw her for what she truly was, a predator who had groomed my son and targeted my legacy. I looked past her into the foyer and saw Ethan standing at the top of the stairs. He was watching us. Our eyes met for a fleeting second, and in that moment, I saw the truth. He wasn't going to save me. He wasn't going to defend the woman who had given him everything. He looked away, retreating into the shadows of the hallway. That was the final snap. The warmth I had felt for them turned into a block of ice. My grief for my husband, my love for my son, and my pride in this home coalesced into a single, freezing point of resolve. I stopped shaking, my posture straightened, and my eyes cleared. I wasn't just a mother or a widow anymore. I was Dr. Rosemary Collins, and I had spent my career dealing with rot. It was time to perform an extraction. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. A retired surgeon knows that when a limb is gangrenous, you don't negotiate with the infection, you prepare the theater. I walked back to my cottage with a gait so steady it would have surprised my younger self. My mind was no longer a whirlwind of hurt. It was a cold, calculating machine. If Olivia wanted to treat our relationship like a legal transaction, then I would provide the finest legal expertise money could buy. The next morning, I didn't go to the main house. I didn't send a good morning text. Instead, I sat at my desk and opened a heavy, dust-covered leather binder. Inside were the original deeds, the trust agreements, and the right of occupancy clauses David and I had insisted on when we gifted the house to Ethan. I called Marcus Thorne, a man who had been our family lawyer and my patient for 30 years. "Rosemary," he said, his voice grave when I finished explaining the situation. "You were generous to a fault, but generosity without boundaries is just an invitation for overreach. Give me 48 hours. While Marcus worked the legal angles, I began my own audit of the estate. I realized that while I had handed over the keys, I had never handed over the financial responsibility. I had been quietly paying the property taxes, the premium insurance, and the astronomical landscaping fees from my own retirement accounts. I was essentially funding my own exclusion. That ended at 9 a.m. on Monday. I called the utility companies. I called the high-end landscaping firm. I called the pool maintenance service. "This is Dr. Collins," I said, my voice as firm as it was when I used to direct my surgical assistants. "Effective immediately, I am closing the accounts for the main residence at 124 Heritage Lane. Any future services must be contracted and paid for by the current residents, Ethan and Olivia Collins. Do not bill me." Next, I addressed the security issue. If Olivia wanted locks, I would give her a lesson in surveillance. I hired a private security firm to install high-definition cameras throughout the exterior of the property, not to spy on their private lives, but to document every guest and event they hosted in the house I was still legally the primary owner of. I also installed a high-tech, reinforced gate at the entrance of the driveway. Only my phone had the master override. The most satisfying part of my response, however, was the itemized legacy list. I spent hours walking through my memory, listing every piece of furniture, every heirloom, and every piece of art that David and I had purchased. The mahogany table, the Persian rugs, the crystal chandeliers, all of it was legally mine, loaned to them for their convenience. I had the receipts, the appraisals, and the photos. I felt a surge of justice building within me. It wasn't about being petty, it was about reclaiming the ground I had surrendered. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction as I watched the landscapers pull away from the main house mid-mow because their payment had been canceled. I watched from my window as Olivia came out onto the porch, looking confused, and then panicked as she realized the sprinklers weren't turning on and the gate wouldn't open for her morning yoga instructor. I sat in my cottage, sipping my tea, watching the feed from my new cameras. I saw her pacing the porch, her face twisted in a mixture of rage and disbelief. She tried to call me, her name flashing on my screen over and over. I didn't answer. I simply silenced the phone and turned it face down. The tension in the air was palpable, even from across the lawn. I wasn't just the ghost in the cottage anymore. I was the architect of their new, very expensive reality. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of exhilaration. I was no longer the victim of her coldness. I was the enforcer of my own worth. I had spent my life fixing things, but I realized that some things like a broken character can't be fixed. They have to be removed. I expected a white flag, but Olivia was more desperate than I imagined. 2 days after I cut the funding, a knock didn't come, a process server did. I was handed a thick envelope containing a petition for a conservatorship. My heart plummeted. They weren't just fighting for the house, they were coming for my mind. Olivia and Ethan were claiming that my erratic behavior, sudden financial withdrawals, and obsessive surveillance were signs of early onset dementia. An hour later, they marched into my cottage, flanked by a man in a white coat, a psychologist I'd never met. Olivia looked at me with a performative, sickeningly sweet concern that made my skin crawl. "Rosemary, honey," she cooed, though her eyes were predatory. "We're just worried. You're not yourself. Cutting off the water? Locking the gates? It's clear you can't manage your affairs anymore." Ethan stood behind her, his face a mask of calculated grief. "Mom, please," he said, though his voice lacked any real conviction. "We just want you to get help. If you sign over the full deed and the power of attorney to us today, we can handle the medical side quietly. You won't have to go to a facility." The audacity was breathtaking. They were trying to gaslight a woman who had spent 40 years diagnosing complex pathologies. Olivia stepped closer, her hand reaching out as if to pat mine, but I saw the way her fingers were trembling with greed. She wanted the keys to my bank accounts, my retirement, and my dignity. She began documenting my confusion on her phone, whispering to the doctor about how I talked to walls and imagined that I still owned the property. I felt a wave of nausea, followed by a cold, sharp clarity. My own son was standing there, watching his wife try to have me declared incompetent so they could keep their lifestyle. I looked at Ethan, searching for a flicker of the boy I'd raised, but all I saw was a man who had traded his soul for a mahogany table. My hands gripped the arms of my chair so hard my knuckles turned white. My face remained a mask of professional calm, even as my internal world screamed in betrayal. They were calling the authorities, threatening to have me evaluated by the state if I didn't comply. It was a high-stakes play for total control, designed to make me feel small, crazy, and defeated. They wanted me to break, to cry, to prove their point. But they forgot one thing. I am a Collins. We don't break, we endure. I let the silence hang in the air for a long, heavy minute, allowing Olivia to bask in her perceived victory. She looked at the psychologist with a smug, "I told you so," tilt of her head. I leaned back in my armchair, smoothed my skirt, and finally looked at the doctor. "Doctor," I said, my voice steady and resonant. "I assume you're here to witness a mental breakdown. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but what you're actually witnessing is a hostile takeover." I reached into the drawer of my side table and pulled out a digital tablet. I tapped the screen and turned it toward them. "You mentioned erratic behavior, Olivia. Let's talk about that." I played the footage from the hidden cameras, not the ones on the porch, but the ones David had installed inside the main house years ago for security, which I had never deactivated. The screen showed Olivia and Ethan in the dining room the night after I cut the utilities. The audio was crystal clear. Olivia was shouting, "I don't care if she's his mother, Ethan. We need her to sign the deed before the bank realizes the property taxes haven't been paid. If we have to call her crazy to get her out of that cottage, then that's what we do. I'm not losing this house because of that old hag's ego." Olivia's face went from pale to a sickly mottled gray. Ethan looked like he wanted to sink into the floorboards. The psychologist shifted uncomfortably, his professional mask crumbling. "But that's just the appetizer," I continued, my eyes locked on Olivia's. "You see, as a dentist, I was a mandated reporter and very meticulous with records. I've always kept a close eye on my finances." "Marcus?" On cue, my front door opened. Marcus Thorne walked in, followed by 2 men in suits, investigators from the state's attorney's office. "Good afternoon," Marcus said, placing a heavy briefcase on my coffee table. We've been looking into the financial management Olivia mentioned. It turns out, Olivia has been funneling money from Ethan's joint business account, money that was supposed to be going toward the mortgage. David and I helped co-sign into a private offshore account in her maiden name. It's called embezzlement, Olivia. And since the business is technically a subsidiary of my family trust, it's also fraud. The room felt like the air had been sucked out of it. Olivia tried to speak, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Her hands were shaking violently now, but not with grief, with pure, unadulterated terror. "Wait, Mom," Ethan started, his voice cracking. "Don't mom me, Ethan," I snapped, the authority in my voice cutting him off like a scalpel. "You stood by while she plotted to have me committed. You are an accessory to her greed." Marcus handed a folder to the psychologist. "Doctor, this folder contains Dr. Collins's most recent cognitive evaluation, performed last week at the university hospital. She passed with perfect scores. It also contains the evidence of the Parker Collins financial discrepancies. I suggest you leave before you become a witness in a criminal proceeding." The doctor didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his bag and vanished. I stood up, my legs feeling stronger than they had in years. "Olivia, there is a police cruiser waiting at the end of the driveway. You have 20 minutes to pack a bag of your personal belongings, excluding anything on the legacy list I sent to your email an hour ago. If you are still on my property after that, you will be arrested for trespassing and grand larceny." The truth was laid bare in the cold light of my living room. The victim they tried to create had turned into their judge and jury. The satisfaction of watching Olivia's composure shatter into 1,000 jagged pieces was more restorative than any vacation I'd ever taken. I watched as the investigators escorted them out. The house I built was finally being purged of the rot. I stood by the window of my cottage, watching Olivia's SUV roll down the long driveway for the very last time. The heavy iron gates, the ones I had recently reinforced, swung shut with a definitive, metallic thud, a period at the end of a long, painful sentence. Silence settled over the Collins estate, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of secrets and whispers. It was the quiet of a house that had finally been exhaled. I took a deep, shaky breath, feeling the air fill my lungs without the bitter aftertaste of betrayal. I walked across the lawn toward the main house, my pace steady and intentional. Each step on the stone path felt like a reclamation of territory. I pushed open the heavy oak front doors and stepped into the foyer. No one was there to tell me I wasn't invited. No one was there to treat me like a ghost in my own history. I walked straight to the dining room and stood before that mahogany table. I ran my hand over the polished surface, tracing the grain I knew by heart. It wasn't just furniture. It was a testament to the life David and I had built together. Now, it was no longer a stage for Olivia's cruelty. The victory felt solid, but it was tempered by a profound, aching sadness. I looked at a photograph on the mantel, Ethan as a toddler, then a graduate, then a groom. The weight of his betrayal sat heavy in my gut. I had poured my life into his, making sacrifices he would never fully understand, only to have him watch in silence as his wife tried to strip me of my sanity. That realization brought a sting of tears to my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I had mourned the son I thought I had. Now, I had to accept the man he had become. He would have to live with the consequences of his cowardice. He was moving into a small apartment in the city, stripped of the luxury he had taken for granted, while Olivia faced the legal fallout of her financial adjustments. I decided then that I wouldn't move back into the big house. It held too many shadows now. Instead, I called a high-end management firm to list it as a premium rental property. The income would fund a foundation in David's name, providing dental care for veterans who couldn't afford it. I realized that my legacy wasn't in the bricks and mortar, but in the power I had to change lives, including my own. The feeling of justice was intoxicating. I had taught Olivia that respect isn't something you inherit through a marriage certificate, it's something you earn. And I had taught Ethan that his mother wasn't a resource to be tapped until dry. I sat on the porch of my cottage that evening with a glass of vintage Chardonnay, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight. I felt light. I felt capable. I began looking at travel brochures for the Amalfi Coast trips David and I had put off for the future. I had reclaimed my life, my finances, and most importantly, my self-worth. I was no longer the relic Olivia tried to cast me as. I was Rosemary Collins, a woman of substance and steel. The house was quiet, the gates were locked, and for the first time in 5 years, I was truly, beautifully free. The house is quiet now, but my mind is a battlefield. I sit in David's old leather wingback chair, the one that still smells faintly of his sandalwood cologne, and I find myself staring at my hands. They aren't shaking anymore, but they feel heavy, weighted down by the invisible burden of what I've just done. There is a victory here, yes, but it's a Pyrrhic one. I won the house, I won the legal battle, and I won back my dignity, but at what cost? I find myself replaying the moment Ethan looked away at the top of the stairs. That image is burned into the back of my eyelids. Every time I close my eyes, I see his slumped shoulders and that hollow look in his eyes. I wonder, where did I go wrong? Was I too controlling? Did I provide so much that I never taught him how to have a spine? My fingers trace the smooth leather of the chair, and I feel a sharp, stabbing regret. I wanted to be the matriarch of a thriving family, not the warden of an empty estate. Sometimes, I walk into the main house at night, the floorboards creaking under my feet, and I feel like a villain in my own story. I see the empty spaces where Olivia's things used to be, and even though I loathed her presence, the void she left behind is chilling. I catch my reflection in the hallway mirror, the tight set of my jaw, the coldness in my eyes, and I barely recognize myself. Is this who I've become? A woman who uses lawyers and surveillance to communicate with her only child? My heart is a tangled mess of I had to, and I wish I didn't. I know I was right to defend myself. I know Olivia was a predator. But the mother in me, the woman who stayed up all night when Ethan had the croup, the woman who saved every one of his finger paintings, is screaming in agony. I feel a physical ache in my chest, a pressure behind my eyes that refuses to turn into tears. I rub my temples, trying to massage away the guilt. Did I trade my son for a mahogany table? I look out at the dark lawn toward the cottage. I am safe, I am secure, but the loneliness is a cold, biting wind. I struggle with the realization that in order to save my life, I had to effectively end my relationship with my son as I knew it. My face in the mirror looks older, more etched with the reality of this choice. I'm proud of my strength, but I'm terrified of the hardness it required. I am a doctor who successfully removed the cancer, but I'm left staring at the scars, wondering if the patient, our family, will ever really breathe the same way again. The dust has finally settled, and in the clarity of the aftermath, I've realized that my greatest mistake wasn't being generous, it was being transactional without realizing it. I spent years believing that by providing a house, a legacy, and financial security, I was weaving a safety net of love. I learned the hard way that you cannot buy a seat at a table, even if you're the one who bought the table itself. Respect is not a byproduct of a deed transfer. It is a boundary that must be established from day one. I learned that my identity was too wrapped up in being the provider, which left me vulnerable when those I provided for no longer wanted my presence, only my assets. I've discovered that peace is more valuable than property. I've learned to listen to the silence of my own cottage and realize it isn't emptiness, it's room for me to breathe, away from the toxic expectations of a role I forced myself to play. I've decided that if a bridge is ever to be rebuilt between Ethan and me, it won't be made of wood and mortar, but of truth and distance. I sent him a letter, not a legal notice, but a handwritten note. I told him I love him, but that I will no longer fund a life where I am treated as an inconvenience. I've set a strict boundary. We will meet for lunch once a month in a neutral, public place. No talk of the house, no talk of the trust, and no talk of Olivia. We are starting over from zero, as two adults rather than a provider and a dependent. I'm encouraging him to seek the therapy he clearly needs to understand why he allowed his life to be hijacked. I am keeping the gates locked for now, not out of malice, but to give us both the space to realize that our relationship must be based on mutual respect, or it won't exist at all. I am choosing to be his mother, not his benefactor. Looking back, my biggest error was the gift itself. I handed over the keys to the main house far too early, fueled by a desperate desire to keep Ethan close to me after David died. It was a decision made out of grief and a fear of loneliness, rather than wisdom. By blurring the lines between my home and theirs, I created a gray zone where Olivia felt she could colonize my space and Ethan felt he didn't have to grow up. I should have kept my home as my sanctuary and helped them build their own elsewhere. By trying to buy a family dynamic, I inadvertently fueled the greed and resentment that nearly destroyed us. It was a mistake of the heart, thinking that material abundance could substitute for clear, healthy boundaries. I realize now that by giving them everything, I gave them the power to think I was nothing. I won't make that mistake again. My legacy will now be my own to manage, and my love will no longer come with a title deed attached. To everyone watching this, especially those of you who have spent your lives building a nest only to find yourselves pushed out of it, understand that love without boundaries is not love. It is an invitation for exploitation. In American culture, we often celebrate the selfless parent, the one who gives until they have nothing left. But there is a profound danger in erasing yourself for the sake of your children's comfort. My story isn't just about a house or a mahogany table. It's about the fundamental human need for respect and the necessity of maintaining your own identity as you age. Empathy is a two-way street. It is not your job to be a martyr for a family that views your lifetime of hard work as an obstacle to their inheritance. We often feel guilty for saying no or for demanding the respect we've earned. But remember, you cannot pour from an empty cup, and you certainly cannot live in a house where you are treated as a ghost. Boundaries are not walls meant to keep people out. They are gates meant to show people where the entrance to your heart actually is. If they can't respect the gate, they don't deserve to be in the garden. Communication must be clear, even when it's uncomfortable. I spent too much time being polite when I should have been firm. If someone tells you that you aren't invited to the table you provided, believe them and then take your table back. You are not a relic because you are older. You are a foundation. And foundations deserve to be protected. To the adult children listening, your parents' success is not your entitlement. Their generosity is a gift, not a debt they owe you. And to the mothers-in-law, don't be afraid to be the villain in someone else's distorted story if it means being the hero of your own. Protect your peace, protect your assets, and never apologize for requiring the respect that 30, 40, or 50 years of life has earned you. Your legacy is not what you leave behind in a will, it's how you demand to be treated while you're still here to see it. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this journey. It wasn't an easy story to share, but I hope my experience serves as a wake-up call for anyone feeling like a stranger in their own home. If this story resonated with you, or if you've dealt with a similar Olivia in your life, please share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your support means the world to me. Don't forget to hit that like button if you believe that respect is non-negotiable, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new story from the Collins estate. Your engagement helps me reach more people who might be going through the same struggle. Click the notification bell to stay updated, and feel free to share this video with a friend who needs to hear this message today. Thank you for being part of my community. I'll see you in the next video, where I'll be sharing more about my new life and the lessons I'm learning along the way. Stay strong, and remember, you are the architect of your own happiness.